I also want to acknowledge and welcome representatives of the U.S. Attorney's Office, Steve Dettelbeck, Carol Schwartz-Randown, and Michelle Heyer. They are again from the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Northern District of Ohio, and they were also instrumental in working on the Demyanya case, and we'll ask them for comment also briefly at the end of Mr. Rosenbaum's presentation. Before we get into the Q&A, I also want to recognize and acknowledge our friends and the leaders of Call Israel for being here today also. And finally, I want to thank members of the Robert Jackson Center who have been working with Mr. Rosenbaum on this Cleveland trip, as well as Vic Gelb for making the connection. In just a moment, I'm going to turn the podium over to Greg Petersen, President and founder of the Robert H. Jackson Center, to speak briefly about the center and to formally introduce Eli Rosenbaum. Before I do, however, I want to remind everyone that this briefing is taking place wholly off the record. We have purposely not invited the media, so we ask for your discretion in discussing what Mr. Rosenbaum shares with us today. And now it's my pleasure to turn over the podium to Greg Petersen. Greg is a partner at the firm Phillips Lytle LLP and is president and founder of the Robert H. Jackson Center in Jamestown, New York. Founded in 2001, the center is dedicated to preserving, promoting, and advancing the legacy of U.S. Supreme Court Justice Robert H. Jackson, the chief U.S. prosecutor at the International Military Tribunal at Nuremberg. Mr. Petersen.
Thank you again for being here. I'm thrilled to be here in Cleveland, thrilled to have a relationship which goes back really from the beginning to the Cleveland area. Henry King, Case Western Reserve, Vic Gelb, Arnie Bello, Amy Greenberg, folks that are at Chautauqua Institution, and to be able to come here today and to talk a little bit briefly about the Robert H. Jackson Center. As was indicated, we were organized in 2001 to advance the legacy of Robert Jackson, a Justice of the United States Supreme Court. And you might ask, why and why there? And this is principally where he grew up, was the Jamestown area, and he practiced law there. But he's also the answer to the Jeopardy question, and the only man in the history of the United States to be a Justice of the United States Supreme Court, Attorney General, and Solicitor General, and it's Robert H. Jackson. And oh, by the way, as was mentioned, he was the chief American prosecutor at the Nuremberg trial. And we had created something up in Jamestown, and I would invite all of you who decide to go to Chautauqua Institution and come up to our area, we're only 10 minutes away, for an opportunity to take a look and see what we've accomplished. It's an incredible opportunity for us to advance the legacy of law through that particular institution. And we've had great collaborations through Case Western. We've had great collaborations through a variety of institutions, including the city of Nuremberg. And frankly, we look forward to maybe there's an opportunity to collaborate more with this organization as well. So I'm thrilled that we've had the opportunity to be here. We've left some goodies for you to learn a little bit more about the Robert H. Jackson Center. My job is simple, to introduce Eli Rosenbaum. Eli Rosenbaum he's got a long title now, but more importantly, he was director of the United States Department of Justice Office of Special Investigations, really from 1995 until recent activities occurred in the Department of Justice. Honors program after graduating from Harvard Law School at the Department of Justice. He was a trial attorney from 1980 to 1984. Then he became a corporate litigator and general counsel for the World Jewish Congress. And then he came back to the Office of Special Investigations at the Department of Justice. As I mentioned, he has been a director, and frankly was, by ABC News, on all accounts, the head of an organization which was this most successful government Nazi hunting organization on earth. And it really is a tribute to Eli Rosenbaum for all that's been accomplished. And it's just an honor for us to have him here today as part of this specific event. So without further ado, Eli Rosenbaum.
Thank you much. It's great to be here this morning. I don't think I need this. People will let me know if they can't hear me. especially to be introduced by a dear friend, Greg Petersen, to be in the same room with your distinguished United States Attorney, Steve Delback, with his colleagues, and a special shout out, where's Michelle? There, to one of OSI's best ever trial attorneys, Michelle Heyer, who worked on the Damiano case, did spectacular work on that and everything else that you worked on, and is now an assistant U.S. attorney here in Cleveland, still working with us on these cases. I want to say a few things about our partnership first with the U.S. Attorney's Office, which has always been outstanding on the Nazi cases. And I saw that again most recently when, and I'll address this later, there was what we call a Damiano eruption, this wire service story claiming that the FBI had concluded that the evidence against Damiano was forged, and that led the public defender in Cleveland to file a motion with the court seeking to be appointed to represent Damiano, to explore his legal options against the Justice Department. I think a logical, normal reaction for people who were not involved personally in the Damiano case at that point would be, gosh, keep it away from me. Steve Delback wanted to know what he could do to help on this. And he was in Washington, and we met, and he helped, and he authorized Michelle to continue working on this, and we are abidingly grateful. Steve's a legend in the law, you all know, a valued member also of the Jewish community here, and we are just very, very grateful. When I told my colleagues at work that I was coming to Cleveland to speak, they were like, "Where? You're going to Cleveland?" You will forgive me, I love Cleveland. It's a beautiful, beautiful town, but in my office, coming here is considered to be going into the belly of the beast because it's Damiano territory, and I'm sure I'm going to get some tough grilling when they do the Q&As at the City Club this afternoon, but we'll see what happens. I'm going to speak primarily about the Damiano case, give you a look at what was going on inside, but also talk about some of our other cases, but you will see everything somehow is going to be related to the Damiano case. Now, that case, as you may know, took place, involved litigation and investigation on 3 different continents over more than 30 years. The original Damiano citizenship revocation case, the denaturalization case, was filed in the end of August 1977. I think a week later I started law school. So it's been around the block a few times. I did a PowerPoint, which I'm going to attempt to show you. There are some technical issues here. We'll see how it works. Bear with me. There we go. I'm not doing this only because my friends from the Jackson Center are here. I just about always start a talk on the work that we've done in the Nazi cases with reference to Justice Jackson for 2 reasons. One, we at the Department of Justice claim him as our own. He was 57th Attorney General of the United States, if memory serves. I hope I have the number right, that he was Attorney General before his appointment by Franklin Delano Roosevelt to the Supreme Court, I am sure of. But he was also the originator of efforts internationally to secure a measure of justice on behalf of the victims of Nazi inhumanity. This was done, as Greg mentioned, of course, at Nuremberg. Here you see Goering and some of the other defendants. Here is a rare color photograph of Justice Jackson at the Nuremberg podium. Now, Justice Jackson's dream was that Nuremberg would be only a start, that efforts to deter the repetition of such crimes by the continued investigation and prosecution of war criminals and perpetrators of crimes against humanity would continue. Tragically, that did not happen. The Cold War, which really was already underway before the hot war between the Allied and Axis forces ended, soon prevented continued East-West cooperation on these cases. That fact is reflected in this formerly classified British cable that went from the Commonwealth Relations Office to its counterpart offices in the various Commonwealth countries, and they informed those other nations there in mid-1948 that they were going to bring an end to British prosecutions of Nazis by the end of 1948, and they urged the other Commonwealth countries to do likewise. And as if you can read the text there, they explained that it is now necessary to dispose of the past as soon as possible. And what was going on was that we needed the western part of Germany as our ally in the new Cold War, or the revived Cold War against the Soviet Union. And so, in the British view, which was shared by the Americans, there was no reason to keep dwelling on the past and rubbing the Germans' noses in it. And so the British and others, including the United States, by the end of 48, early 49, went out of the business, so to speak, of pursuing justice on behalf of the victims. And as that effort ended, immigration from Europe was ramped up, and among the hundreds of thousands of people who immigrated to this country, we found at least hundreds of Nazi war criminals came as well. One of the earliest was this man, Andrei Artukovich, the only cabinet-level Nazi official ever known to have come to the United States. He was Minister of the Interior and Justice Minister of Axis Croatia. If you go to the Library of Congress in the town in which I now live, and go to their European Law Division, you can see bound wartime volumes of Croatian government decrees, many of them signed by Artukovich. So, for instance, he signed one setting up a nationwide concentration camp system. Thousands of Jews and Serbs and Gypsies died in those camps. He signed an order expropriating the property of every Jewish man, woman, and child in Croatia. He signed one requiring adult Jews to wear a marking on their outer clothing to reveal that they were Jews. He signed another one commanding that if adults whose arrest for internment in concentration camps couldn't be found, but their children were left behind, the children should be sent to the camps. Artukovich came here in 1949 or 1950. He was found almost immediately. Deportation proceedings were initiated by the then U.S. Immigration and Naturalization Service. They got bogged down in court. Then an extradition attempt was made by the government of Yugoslavia. That too failed, despite the fact that those decrees were of unquestioned authenticity. A federal magistrate, the federal magistrate who denied the extradition request, did so in a published decision that clearly reflects the Red Scare hysteria of the 1950s. He dismissed all the witness affidavits against Artukovich, and as to the decrees that Artukovich unquestionably signed, he wrote, again, it's also somewhat sexist language, he said, how are we going to find men to serve in government office if we hold them responsible for documents that they sign? And I remember the first time I read that as a law student, and I thought, Justice Jackson must be turning over in his grave, because the Nuremberg prosecutions were built largely on a foundation of captured German documents. Eventually, after my office, my former office, OSI, was created in 1979, we inherited the Artukovich case. He was still here. In the mid-'80s, we managed to extradite him to what was Yugoslavia still, and he was tried in Zagreb, the capital of the Croatian Republic, convicted and sentenced to death. It turns out that Artukovich had one very, very active supporter in the 50s as he was fighting these battles, a Cleveland man, no longer with us, as Gilbert and Sullivan used to say, not missed, Jerome Brentar, who operated a Europa travel agency in Cleveland. And he worked indefatigably to aid Artukovich and did so successbeknownst for a number of years. Another man who immigrated to the United States, of course, is this man, Jonathan Yanyuk, who came here in 1952. Unbeknownst to U.S. authorities, he had been a guard at, among other places, the notorious Sobibor death camp in Nazi-occupied Poland, one of just 5 actual death camps, that is, camps that were built solely to kill human beings. It had no slave labor function. As the concentration camps did. It was solely designed to transform human beings from flesh and blood to smoke and ash, which it ordinarily did within hours of their arrival. What U.S. authorities didn't have, but which we obtained from the Soviet Union many decades later, was this well-known ID card issued at the Trebniki SS base and training camp in occupied Poland. Trebniki was, to put it bluntly, a school for mass murder. It's where they trained men like Demjanjuk to take part in roundups of Jews, to send them to the camps, and also train them to operate, that is, to work as guards in the Nazi camps, especially in the Nazi death camps. But we didn't know that. Interestingly, you'll notice, by the way, if you can read it, I've got two arrows there, one pointing to his name, and the lower arrow says Sobibor. That's an assignment that he had. This document, if I didn't mention it before, you probably all know, was captured by the Soviets and ultimately provided to us. Interestingly, when Demjanjuk immigrated to the United States, and I wonder how many people have actually seen this, on his visa application, where he had to disclose where he had lived prior to the end of the war, he wrote that from 1934 to 1943, he lived in Sobibor, Poland. Now, to everyone in this room, that is a justly notorious word. It sends a chill up our spine, shiver up our spine, right? But to the young folks who were processing hundreds of thousands of would-be immigrants to the United States, Demjanjuk correctly gambled that that word would mean nothing. The Nazis had razed the camp, and nobody realized what that word meant. I dare say that if we were to go out in our country now and take a survey of all Americans, just tell them the word Sobibor, what does it mean to you? How many people would know? 1/100th of 1%? And I'm sorry to say that the percentage among our own people would be what, maybe 5%, 10%? Because you'll never meet a Sobibor survivor. There were hardly any who survived. But he wrote that. It was cleverly done, by the way, to make it appear as though he had lived there since before the war. And so the folks who were processing visa applications would look at that and figure, okay, well, he was home until 1943. Then maybe he went to war. Let's see where he went after that. And his listings for post-Sobibor were quite innocuous. As I mentioned, in 1979, my former office was created by order of then Attorney General Benjamin Civiletti during the Jimmy Carter administration. That was the result of the exposure by the media, especially the New York Times, and then in congressional hearings of the fact that there were Nazi criminals living among us here in the United States and that they weren't being prosecuted. Indeed, for the most part, they weren't even being investigated. The Immigration Service was not interested. So our office was created. I remember it well because I was a summer intern in 1979 there at 14th and K on the second floor above the fried chicken restaurant. And I often say that my entire career appears to have been a summer internship gone awry. But there it is. There were no guidebooks for what we were supposed to do. We had to invent it as we went along. Sure, we made our share of mistakes, but on the whole, we got it right. And we started identifying Nazi criminals. One of the first cases we handled was that of this man, Leonidas Kairis, who was a guard. He too was trained at the Trebniki training camp. And he was a guard at the Treblinka labor camp, which was near to the Treblinka death camp in the same town. And at the end, they killed all the remaining Jewish prisoners, and Kairis took a leading role in that. He was particularly brutal guard. Here you see him just before we deported him to Germany many years later. This was the first case that I ever worked on that went to trial in Chicago, where Kairis lived. And he was represented by a very large Chicago law firm, Kirkland & Ellis, pro bono. And they included on their defense list a man named Jerome Brentar. But we didn't know who Jerome Brentar was. So we decided, of course, to take his pretrial deposition, find out what he was to say. We had been told by Kirkland & Ellis that Brentar would say that he worked processing U.S. immigration applications after the war in Germany, and he would say that if Kairis had served in the SS, it wouldn't have made any difference, because had he disclosed it, he still would have been given a visa. And I know that, I, Jerome Brentor, because I helped thousands of SS men come to the United States. I don't believe that, and in fact, serving in the SS was a disqualifier. But in any event, that was to be his testimony. I remember being at Kirkland and Ellis's Chicago offices. I was the first one there, so they put me in the conference room, and finally in walks this nice middle-aged gentleman, nice looking anyway, and he introduced himself, and I introduced myself, and he said, "Oh, Rosenbaum, what kind of name is that?" I said, truthfully, I said, it's German. And it is. And he said, "Oh, very, very good. And your colleague, Mr. Scher, who's coming, who, by the way, is Jewish, what kind of name is that?" And truthfully, I said, it's Lithuanian. He said, "Oh, very good," and he smiled. So we took his deposition, and at one point, my colleague who carried the laboring oar in that one said, "Mr. Brentor, the subpoena that you received directed you to bring with you any documents you have on Nazi crimes. Did you have any, and did you bring them?" And he said, yes. "Well, would you present them, please?" So he reached into a briefcase and he put a stack of stuff on the table. And the deal was I would look through the stuff while Neil was asking the questions. One of the first things I found as I looked through the documents was a pamphlet with the provocative title, "6 Million Lost and Found." It was exactly what you would think. Someone had decided that you could do some calculation that would show that basically all of the Jews who were alive in 1939 miraculously were still alive in Europe in 1946. It's garbage. And then, we took a break. I showed this to my colleague, and when we went back, we started asking questions of Brentor. His answers were all very coy. "Do you believe in this?" "Well, I don't know. I don't know what to believe." "Well, do you believe the Holocaust took place?" "Well, I wasn't there. I don't know." It was very disconcerting. As I said, we went on. We brought other cases, and it was sort of like that game of whack-a-mole. All over the United States, when we would bring cases, in many instances, Jerome Brentor would show up. This is Michael Negelo, who was a concentration camp guard, defense witness, Jerome Brentor. Vasil Krisa, another Travnicki man, Jerome Brentor, defense witness. Algimantas Dailida, a member of the Lithuanian security police in Vilnius, or as we know it as Jews, Vilna, Lithuania. He was living here in Ohio, one of our most important cases, defense witness, Jerome Brentor. We proved, by the way, that Dailida took part in sting operations, luring Jews from the ghetto so that they could be arrested to show off to the Germans how aggressive the Lithuanian security police were, and they would then be dispatched very quickly to the killing site outside of Vilnius. Another one of our important early cases, Arthur Rudolph. During the war, Rudolph was the operations director of an underground V-2 missile facility in central Germany that was part of the Dora-Nordhausen concentration camp. And at that facility, thousands of concentration camp inmates toiled under grotesquely inhumane conditions to build the first operational missiles. Missiles that, of course, killed many, many people in London and in Belgium in particular. This particular image is a page from Rudolph's wartime identity booklet, and you see the swastika stamp to the right of the top red arrow. And after the war, Rudolph's services were eagerly sought by Allied governments, and he was hired by the British and Americans to test launch V-2 missiles. And rather than issue him a new ID card, they just affixed a British military stamp right under the German swastika stamp. So, that saying, "a picture is worth 1,000 words," I think that's really, really true here. After that, Rudolph was brought to the United States along with Werner von Braun and other leading German missile scientists to work on American military missile programs. And Rudolph was ultimately put in charge of the Pershing missile program in Europe, or at least the construction of the Pershing missile. Then, after President Kennedy announced in 1961 that we would attempt a lunar landing within the decade, von Braun, Rudolph, and most of the others transferred from the Defense Department to the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, where Arthur Rudolph was put in charge of building the Saturn V rocket. And there it is. And so it is, and I'll say this again this afternoon, a sad part of our history. that the rocket that took humankind to the moon in 1969 was built by a Nazi slave master. I ended up questioning Rudolph. He made a lot of damning admissions, and then his lawyer proposed that he basically give up, that we not file a denaturalization case and then a follow-on deportation case. He would agree to leave the country, go back to Germany, and give up his U.S. citizenship. We, of course, couldn't say no to that. He also wanted a secret deal. We did say no to that, and after he left, we announced it. It was a very big worldwide news story. After we made the case public, a lot of unpleasant characters came to Rudolph's defense. One of them was a congressman from Ohio. Any guesses? Oh, please. No. Jim Trafficant. Yeah, he's back. And at one point, we had an informant who told us that they were going to bring Rudolph back to the United States, and they had come up with a heck of a scheme. They were going to fly him to Canada, and he was going to meet Trafficant and other supporters in Canada. It turned out that all the travel arrangements were made by Jerome Brentar, who was to go there as well. He got all the tickets arranged. And what were they going to do? They were going to go from Toronto to Niagara Falls, Canada. And they were going to march over the Peace Bridge into Niagara Falls in the Empire State. And how are they going to get Rudolph past U.S. immigration on the bridge? Rudolph was going to be handcuffed to Jim Trafficant. And when they would be stopped, the congressman would say, I am en route to vote in Washington, and so as a matter of law, you can't stop me. I've never seen that law, by the way. I yield to the U.S. Attorney on that one. I've never seen it. But that's commonly believed. So I'm going to vote. You can't stop me. And it just so happens that this man is handcuffed to me. We alerted the Canadians, and then I called the Immigration Service, and they passed me through to the Peace Bridge, where an INS agent who'd seen it all, he'd been there in the anti-war days, he'd seen every kind of demonstration, told me, don't worry, if they show up, we will prevent their entry, and he explained how they were going to do it. If Trafficant shows up with Rudolph handcuffed to his wrist, we will handcuff Rudolph's other wrist to the bridge. And we will tell the congressman that he's welcome to stay handcuffed to Arthur Rudolph as long as he wants. Well, of course, one of the big cases that we prosecuted in partnership, as was so in the Davida case with your U.S. Attorney's Office, was John Demjanjuk, who you see here in a photo in Life magazine back in 1980. The denaturalization suit was tried in 1981 on the basis primarily of two factual allegations. That he had served at Treblinka. You know, they were witnesses, Jewish survivors who had identified a photograph, a post-war photograph of Demjanjuk as the man they remembered as the notorious gas chamber operator Ivan. And also the other allegation, primary allegation, being that he took part in the mass murder of Jews also at the Sobibor death camp. Sobibor was really the mirror image of Treblinka, only somewhat smaller. Case went to trial in 1981 before the late Judge Frank Battisti, and he is missed. And Judge Battisti found that Demjanjuk was Ivan the Terrible from Treblinka. He also confirmed that Demjanjuk had served at the Travniki training camp, which also barred him from entering the United States, hence rendering his citizenship illegally procured. And he also, but Judge Battisti declined to reach the issue of Sobibor. He said it wasn't necessary to decide that part of the case, which was very, very unfortunate. But I do think it's important to note that Sobibor and Treblinka were part of the original case. Sobibor has always been part of the Demjanjuk case. It's really the original allegation. So we won our two offices won the denaturalization case. Demjanjuk's citizenship was revoked. And then we brought a follow-on deportation case. And who became Demjanjuk's most aggressive and devoted defender? You got it, Jerome Brentar. He ended up ultimately spending over $1 million traveling all over the world, to Poland, Germany, elsewhere, to try to find evidence to save Demjanjuk. And he was called by Demjanjuk's lawyer the key man in the defense. One of the things he did was go to Germany to meet with Kurt Franz. Kurt Franz was first the deputy of the notorious commandant of Treblinka, Franz Stangl, and then Franz succeeded him as commandant. Kurt Franz was probably the single most feared person at Treblinka, and considering who else was there, that's really saying something. He was particularly feared because he walked through the camp with a very large attack dog, which he had trained to attack the genitals of male prisoners. Just incredibly gruesome stuff. He was eventually, after the war, arrested, sentenced, I believe, to life in prison in Germany, but he used to get home leaves. And during one of those home leaves, Jerome Brentar, now you'll forgive me, I'm going to race back there. No, race over here. Sorry. Jerome Brentar went to visit him. He had lots of Nazi friends, Mr. Brentar did. He writes to him in German, Lieber Herr Franz, and at the end he says, our meeting with you will never be forgotten. Our meeting will remain forever in my repertoire of pleasant experiences. You know, it's disgusting stuff. And he denounces the Jews and stuff you would expect from Jerome Brentar. Turns out he also wrote to a German army veteran who had passed through Treblinka. Brentar thought that this guy would confirm for him that Treblinka was not a death camp. And we got this Wehrmacht veteran's letter replying to Brentar, and it was outstanding. He said, I don't know what you're talking about. Treblinka was a human slaughterhouse. They killed thousands and thousands of Jews there. Leave me alone. Brentar also testified in January 1984 in the Demjanjuk deportation case, January 17. And suddenly, in the middle of his court testimony, he blurts out, Treblinka was not a death camp, and it wasn't a death preparatory camp. It was strictly a labor camp. My friends, we know exactly what Treblinka was. In fact, British intelligence intercepted a German report on how many Jews they had killed there. We know the exact number of Jews up through December 31, just 1942, not even counting the 1943 killings. And I actually have the number there, it's not in front of me, but it's well over 700,000 Jewish men, women, children, and babies. But to Jerome Brentar, it was strictly a labor camp. He, by the way, later debated former Congressman Steve Solars on CNN on whether there actually had been a Holocaust. And he especially wanted to counter the allegation that at Treblinka initially, they killed Jews by putting them in gas chambers and filling the chambers with the exhaust from diesel engines. It's before they started using cyanide gas in places like Auschwitz-Birkenau. They used diesel exhaust, and Brentar cracked that, well, you know, diesel is the cleanest gas there is. This kind of presaged the argument that another unpleasant fellow, Pat Buchanan, would later make in a nationally syndicated column in which he said that neither Demjanjuk nor anyone else could have killed Jews in gas chambers through the entrance of diesel exhaust, because there's not enough carbon monoxide in diesel exhaust to kill human beings. It's absolutely false. I had the misfortune of having to double check that, trust me. And for many years, I used to say in speeches, I would read from Buchanan's column, and then I would challenge him to demonstrate this concept in his own garage, but he has yet to take me up on that. I used to offer to buy him, on my modest government salary, the diesel car of his choice, if he would just test this theory. Here's a very, very young Eli Rosenbaum actually having to debate Pat Buchanan on this kind of stuff. And they did tell me when I agreed to go on this show that I would also have to face Robert Novak, who actually made Buchanan seem like a nice guy by comparison. Well, you know what happened. We won the deportation case as well. He was deported to the Soviet Union, but the deportation didn't happen because the Israelis requested his extradition. He went to Israel. Unfortunately, they did not charge him with both Treblinka and civil war as we had here, but only with Treblinka. He was convicted. It was reversed when documents came out of the Soviet Union as that country was dissolving that led the Israeli Supreme Court to conclude, and I think it's a correct decision, that there was significant doubt about whether he was Ivan the Terrible of Treblinka. By the way, and this is not public, and hardly anyone knows it, in 1991, John Demjanjuk Jr. and some other went to Ukraine. It had just gained its independence, and they interviewed people who had been at Treblinka. And one of the people they interviewed was a Ukrainian woman who had worked there in the kitchen and also cleaning the officers' living quarters. And on videotape, she was asked, do you remember Ivan Demjanjuk? And I'm sure to their great surprise, she said, oh yeah, he was there. He did what all the guards did. Who knows? But they withheld that. We were still in litigation, it's a long story, in renewed litigation at that time. It was withheld from us. And in 1993, the then public defender sent it to us. It was too late, of course, to use it in Israel. They held it that long. He sent it to us over a letter, very apologetically explaining that John Jr. and his brother-in-law had given this to me only now. I know I should have produced it to you a long time ago. Anyway, the Israelis released him. He returns to the United States. There he is in Israel. Here he is returning to the United States on a plane with his dear friend, Congressman Traficant. I think I have one more photograph of Congressman Traficant. Yeah, there it is. From a public source, the web. While things were unraveling in Israel, we at OSI found an interesting document. You can't read it, but I put it up there anyway. This was typed at the Flossenburg concentration camp in 1944 on onion skin paper, and they were so short of paper that they typed on both sides. So when it's photographed, you get the text from one, you get the text on one side and the reverse of the text on the other. It's a mess. But with the magnifying glass, one can read this thing, and it's very interesting. It shows that on this date in 1944, Demjanjuk was serving at Flossenburg, just as another Soviet war guard in the Soviet Union had said way back in 1979, I think that was the year, he said, we served together at Sobibor and then at the end of the war at Flossenburg. Demjanjuk is on there, so is the other guard, a man by the name of Ignaz Donalchenko. Demjanjuk's so-called Travniki number that was on that ID card is on that card as well, on this document as well. And where was this document found? In West Germany. This was the first Western confirmation that Demjanjuk was a concentration camp guard. I'm not counting, of course, his visa application, because, and I meant to say, there are over 1,000 localities in Poland. Demjanjuk claims he made this up. He was never in Sobibor, he said in the litigation. He has 4 or 5 different stories about how he came to write Sobibor down. One time he said, I was online during the immigration process, and I asked somebody online, what, I want to be from Poland, what town should I say I was from? And he must have been standing online behind Woody Allen, because the guy said, oh, say Sobibor. Then one time he said, well, there was a big map. And so I just pointed at the map and I saw Sobibor and I put that down. Population of Sobibor, Poland was slightly over 1,000. It is hardly ever shown on maps of Poland, even today. It's just too small. There was nothing going on there, ever, except for the operation of this one big death camp. But this was Western proof. And when Demjanjuk came back, we reinvestigated the case in partnership with the U.S. Attorney's Office. And in 1999, we filed a new denaturalization case because he had regained his U.S. citizenship at the term. And we ultimately won that case. Interestingly, and hardly anyone ever remembers this, at the second trial in the United States, Demjanjuk completely abandoned the claim that the famous ID card was forged by the Soviets. Gone. Now he had a new story. I had a cousin in Ukraine who had my same name, Ivan Demjanjuk, and he stole my identity. My parents' names, my birth date, my birthplace. We pointed out, I guess he also stole your face, huh? And he stole the shrapnel wound on your back, because the Travniki card notes the scar on Demjanjuk's back. It was a ludicrous defense. Chief Judge Paul Mattia didn't buy it. No court in Israel, the United States, or Germany that's ever looked at the documents of the Demjanjuk case has ever doubted that they were authentic. So we won that case, and then we brought our follow-on deportation case. 10 years of litigation. Michelle was there for most of it, doing great work. And finally, we had a final order of deportation, as we say now, removal in, I think, 2008. But where are we going to send him? He was ordered removed to Ukraine, or in the alternative, Poland or Germany. All three countries told us no. And Demjanjuk's lawyers figured that was going to happen. One of them said to me, you know, you can win this, but you'll never get him out, because you know, as I do, no one will take him. We'd had this unfortunate experience in many of our other Nazi cases that no country would take them. So it was a very unpleasant experience. This was our highest profile case, a very important case. We'd won every legal round, and now we could not get the relief that was ordered by the courts. We could not carry out his deportation. And then something of a miracle happened. These two people, two German investigative judges, Thomas Walter on the right, Kirsten Goetze on the left, were assigned to work on the Nazi cases, and they cared deeply. And we worked with them, we shared our evidence. They actually conducted their own investigation. And one of the things they did was run the names of all the men on that 1944 list that we found in West Germany. And they found one guy who was on that list working at Flossenburg the same day as Demjanjuk. And here he is. His name is Alexander Nagorny. He still lives in Germany. It turns out that he and Demjanjuk shared an apartment right after the war for a couple of years in, I think, Landshut, Germany. And you know, the Germans really do keep great records. In Germany, if you move from one residence to another, you have to register. And when, you know, they have all those residence registry records from after the war, and we could prove that these two men shared an apartment. And when questioned by the Germans, Nagorny said, sure, I remember Demjanjuk. We worked together at Flossenburg and we lived together. So, you know, it all comes together. The Germans ended up indicting him in indicting Demjanjuk in 2009. And once the law enforcement authorities did this, the political authorities in Berlin could no longer say, gee, we're not going to take him. Now they had to take him. He was wanted in Germany. Well, you know what happened next. Demjanjuk was shocked. His lawyers were shocked anyway. And they tried a last-ditch effort. They argued that if we put Demjanjuk on a plane to Germany, it would amount to torture in violation of the Convention Against Torture. Talk about an irony. They said he was in very, very bad health. And in fact, when we sent a US government physician to examine Demjanjuk in his home, every time the doctor, you see here in the middle, touched Demjanjuk, he cried out in pain. I think we have a video because this examination was filmed by John Jr., who put it on the internet. I don't know if this is going to work. Do we have sound? It's very low. Now. So you won't hear him probably. The doctor touches him and he cries out, and then he says, oi. And that troubled me because I think there's a copyright on that. On April 14, agents of Immigration and Customs Enforcement, who did a fabulous job on this case, I cannot praise them highly enough, went to Demjanjuk's home to take him out for deportation. And you'll remember there were hundreds of reporters. There were at least 2 helicopters, one from one of your local TV stations, one from CNN, live worldwide coverage as Demjanjuk was taken from his house and whisked to ICE headquarters in Cleveland. And look, mouth agape, motionless, he does appear to be on death's doorstep. This photograph was published in hundreds and hundreds of newspapers, certainly in the Plain Dealer. This is the image that everybody had of Demjanjuk. They took him to ICE headquarters and put him in a room. And unbeknownst to Demjanjuk, they trained the video camera on him, and they did it in a way that it wouldn't pick up anything he said, but you can see him. And I want you to see, this is the same day, 45 minutes after he's on death's doorstep. Watch half a minute of John Demjanjuk. We'll start, I think, in a second. He said, hopefully. Here we go. I don't know if you can see him, but yeah, he's going to talk. going to gesture for us. Somehow this is a little slower than it actually normally plays. Soon he'll smile for us. He's doing pretty well.
Who's he talking to?
I don't know, somebody from ICE apparently. I hear he's fine. He's doing this, money. I don't know what he's saying, but anyway, you get the idea. What he also didn't know is our great colleagues at ICE had followed him the day before when he went to an appointment. That's the last video I'll do. This is Demjanjuk going. He doesn't need a stretcher and he doesn't need a wheelchair. Hey, guess what? He doesn't even need a cane. Closes the door.
Well,
There he goes. He's not going to win any races, but he's fine. This is the very day before. This is the part I like. His companion there goes in before him. She's not concerned. He's behind her, so what? All right. He's fine. Such fakery. And we really tried to make a mockery. And your great political cartoonist, Jeff Darcy, the next day, after we released these videotapes by filing them with the court, did this terrific cartoon. They're the ghosts of two people who died in the camps, and one of them is saying they're deporting him to acting school. On May 11, after we filed those videos with the court, everything changed. The Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals no longer sought to block his deportation, and on May 11, 2009, I'll wrap it up quickly, he went to Germany. This is him arriving, the act is back on, he's arriving in Germany, looking very bad. He goes to trial in Munich, and you've all seen these pictures. He looks terrible. Look at this. Here he is on the opening day of the trial in 2009. Awful. I don't know. Here's another. Here he is coming to court. He's in very bad shape. He was, once again, making a mockery of the legal process. And I contrast his conduct with the courage and dignity of the Holocaust survivors who testified in this case. They didn't testify about Demjanjuk, but about the conditions in civil war. And here's one of them, my good friend Thomas Blatt, one of my heroes. So finally, on the eve of, actually 1 month before the German court was set to rule, the Associated Press publishes this story. This is the headline they assigned to it. AP exclusive, FBI thought Demjanjuk evidence faked. Forgive the colorful highlighting, it has to do with Google. A misleading headline, to say the least. I would say it's a false headline. This entire story was based on some FBI documents that were at the National Archives, to which Demjanjuk's lawyers had access more than a year earlier. And the Associated Press focused on this document, March 4, 1985. It's a report by an FBI agent who's speculating that perhaps the document in the key document back then in the Demjanjuk case, the Travnicki card, is forged. And he explains that Demjanjuk could be targeted by the KGB because he is an outspoken dissident. Excuse me. Demjanjuk was an obscure, really unknown assembly line worker for the Ford Motor Company, and had readily acknowledged that he took part in no anti-Soviet activities. He had no idea why the Soviets would want to expose him. So the premise of this memo is nonsense. The author refers to Treblinka as a prison camp. Gee, I remember when I said, why is that? Why would he call it a prison camp? And he said that the way the Soviets would work in the Nazi cases with OSI is they would fabricate documents. This is his hypothesis. He doesn't say it happened in Demjanjuk or any other case, but hypothesis, it could happen. They would fabricate a document and then bar anyone from testing it forensically to see if it was authentic. Well, had the agent bothered to read the published decision in the Demjanjuk case, he could have read Judge Frank Battisti's description of how the United States government forensically tested the Demjanjuk ID card and how it was offered to the defense for testing, but that the defense declined the invitation. All right? So it's nonsense. But I wondered, what inspired this? And only when we got the rest of the FBI documents did we find out that a certain person was regaling this FBI agent with remarkable tales of Soviet misconduct in the Demyanov case. And yes, it was Jerome Brentar again, who wandered into the FBI Cleveland office one day in 1984 with a former SS man visiting from Germany, Rudolf Reis, and explained how the Soviets were forging all the Demyanov evidence. And I guess the agent fell for it hook, line, and sinker. The Munich court was made aware of these documents. They weren't interested. This wasn't evidence. And on May 11, I believe it was, they convicted Demyanov of being an accessory to murder, to the murders of some 28,000 Jews at Sobibor. Now, maybe you've seen some of these photos. After the court convicted him, they released him pending his appeal. That surprised a lot of us, but that's apparently consistent with standard German procedure. So Demyanov is rolled out of court, and he's met by the press, and suddenly, I don't know, he's not asleep, he's not wearing the baseball cap, not wearing the dark glasses, no mouth agape, he's just annoyed. Here's another one. And here's something nobody in Cleveland except for Michelle has seen. The largest newspaper in Germany, Bild, followed him to where he's living now. And they took some pictures of Mr. Demyanov going for a walk outside. No wheelchair, no stretcher, no cane. The headline in German is The Miraculous Recovery of Evil. And here you see it in close-up. But the FBI stuff, call it that, has been picked up, of course, by Demyanov's family and by our old friend Pat Buchanan, who now says this proves that what I said all along was true. Demyanov was framed by the Soviets. I want to just add one more thing before I finish, and I didn't bring it, so I'm just going to have to paraphrase it. A couple of folks at FBI Cleveland, no longer there, were so in the thrall of Jerome Brentar that they couldn't imagine that there was any problem with it. Perhaps they didn't know about his Holocaust denial activities. And one day in, I think, 1985, an FBI agent, and this is in the public files, gets a call from Michael Katchen, who then headed ADL's Cleveland office. He called because he was concerned, there was concern in the community about one Jerome Brentar, that he was an anti-Semite, who was doing things on behalf of at least one Nazi war criminal, John Demyanov. And the agent wrote a really nasty memo to the file about this call, that it was Mr. Katchen was libeling Mr. Brentar, saying that he was an anti-Semite. There's no reason to think that he is. By the way, even Demyanov now calls him a neo-Nazi, an anti-Semite, and a Holocaust denier. The agent speculated that Mr. Katchen was trying to get information from the FBI in support of Israel's interest in prosecuting him there. So we know what those words mean, though. But Mr. Demyanov is where he should be. He's in Germany. He's been convicted. I thought often all these years of Jewish communal leadership here in Cleveland, which was on the front lines. A difficult situation, to be sure. We are very, very grateful for the support that you've always given us in these prosecutions and in these investigations. We are, as I said, abidingly grateful to Steve and Michelle and Carol and everybody at the U.S. Attorney's Office, because we could not possibly have won these cases without our partners there. I've droned on for too long, and you've all been very patient. Thank you very much.